Alright guys, so we're going to go ahead and get set up here, but before we do I just want to talk a little bit about Sass. This isn't a Sass course. I just want to show you how to use it with Materialize, and all we're really going to be using is variables and maybe a little bit of nesting, a mixin. We're going to create a mixin, which is like a function. But yeah, if we want to create a variable, we can use a money sign and then just name the variable, and we can set it to like a color or a font style, anything in CSS, and then we can simply use it wherever we want. Okay, so any selector, any style, we can use the variable in. We can nest styles, so you can see here they're putting a UL, an LI, and an A tag within the nav tag. So only the UL, LI, and A tags that are inside a nav tag will be affected by these styles. Okay, we can use partials, which are just separate SCSS files. We can import them. We can use mixins, which are like functions. They can take in parameters and so on. We can extend styles or extend classes. So it's really cool. We also have operators, so we can have like dynamic functionality. We can do conditionals, things like that. But I'm not going to get too far into it. I just want to show you how to get it set up and use it in a project. Now, in order to use Sass, the browser doesn't actually read Sass or SCSS files. It has to be compiled to CSS, to regular CSS. And we're going to use a program called Koala for that, which is a GUI program. It's a graphical program. A lot of times you'll see people use command line programs from NPM and stuff, but I don't want to get into that. I don't want to get too deep into the command line, or I shouldn't say too deep. I don't want to get into it at all in this course, because I'll tell you, in my Bootstrap course we used NPM, we used gulp to compile Sass, and it kind of overtook the course. All of the Q&A questions, if you go into that course, it's all about NPM and gulp and not Bootstrap. So I chose a different route with this course and chose not to do any of that, because it just distracted everybody from actual Bootstrap. Alright, so we're going to use a simple GUI program. So let's go ahead and download this and install it. So it's going to download, and basically all we do is add our project. We can click the plus sign, add the project, and we choose where we want to output our regular CSS. We choose this SCSS file, which is our Sass file, and then where we want to output the standard CSS. Okay, we also want to go to Materialize and download the source for the Sass package. So we're going to grab that as well. While that's downloading, let's open up the Koala setup. And depending on what operating system you're on, it may be a little different. On Windows, we're just going to go through this real quick. Just click Next. I already had it installed, so it's telling me I already have the folder, but I'll just click Yes and install. Okay, so it actually is already installed, but that's fine. I'll just go through it again. Alright, so that's all finished. Now we can go ahead and start it up. I'll keep that checked and click Finish. And it's going to start up our program. So we don't have any projects yet. I'm just going to leave this open for now. So now what we'll do is create a new folder for our project. And we're going to call this Gallop here. And what we'll do is take from the theme starter. Initially I was going to do a theme starter for the Sass, but I'll just show you how to implement it with this theme starter. So we're going to copy our files over, and let's open up Gallop here with VS Code. Alright, now what I'm going to do is create, let's open up our folder here. We're going to create a new folder called SCSS. Okay, this is where all of our Sass is going to go. Now, the Sass those are the files that we edit. If you want to change anything in your CSS, you edit your Sass files, and then the compiler will then compile it and put it into the CSS folder as a regular CSS file. Okay, so in the SCSS folder, we're going to create a new file called main.scss, just like that. And then we're also going to open up the materialize zip file that we just downloaded. So it's close that up. And what we want to do is go into the Sass folder, and we want to take these and put them into our SCSS folder. So I'll open up Gallipere here and go into SCSS, and let's bring these to this folder and this file over. We'll look at those in a second. And then that's really all we need. We already have the fonts folder for the JS. We don't need that. We already have the JS. So we have that. Now let's open up VS Code again, or go back to VS Code, and you'll see we have materialize.scss. Now basically what this is just a meeting place for all of the SCSS components. Each aspect of materialize has its own SCSS file. For instance, the carousel has its own SCSS file with all the Sass, and you can see it's using nesting and all that stuff. Badges, buttons, and you can see there's variables in here and all that stuff. Now normally you don't want to change any of this. What you can change, or what you should change, is the underscore variables file. And this is where like the primary color is, the primary color light, primary color dark, secondary color. You can change these values here. And then we have things like the button height. If you wanted to make your standard button height bigger or smaller, you could do that. This is all button stuff. This is all card stuff. The carousel height default is 400, but you could change that here. You could change a lot of stuff from here. So it's really to customize your materialize installation. All right, but we're not going to do too much here. We're going to change up the colors a little bit and maybe a couple other things. All right, now what I want to do is now go to Koala, which is right here, and we're going to add a project. And we basically want to just choose our Sass folder. So it's going to be in my desktop, in the Gallipere folder, and then I want to choose the SCSS folder, and we're going to open that up. So automatically it finds our SCSS files. We have the main file and then materialize. So what I'm going to do here is right click, and I'm going to say set output path for main.scss, and I'm going to set it to the CSS folder to main.css and save. Okay, even though it already exists, I'm going to say yes, and now that's going to compile to that file. This one here, the materialize, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to set the output path to the CSS folder and set it to the materialize min.css and save that. Alright, now if I go back into the folder structure here, if we go back into SCSS, you'll see that it already compiled to CSS before I did anything into the SCSS. Okay, so we don't want these CSS files in here, we want them to go in here to these. So what we can do is delete the main.css and also the source maps. We're not really going to get into that anyways. We can disable those too, but we only want our SCSS files in here, so let's delete that as well. Let's delete this source map. So we should only have these two Sass files and components. Alright, and if we go to Koala, and we can actually uncheck source map for both of these. Okay, and see how it's set to auto compile? That means when we save anything in Sass, it'll auto compile to these CSS files. Alright, so let's go ahead and click compile. It'll auto compile anyways, but now if I look in materialize min CSS, this all came from the materialize Sass file. Alright, and this is the file we want to include in our index.html, which we already are anyways, so we don't have to change that. We don't have to change any of this because we're using the same CSS files. It's just being compiled from our Sass. Alright, so hopefully this isn't too confusing. The setup, once we get set up, then it's basically just like every other project, except we can use variables and stuff. Okay, so let's open this with our live server. And I just want to try something here. So if we go into our main SCSS file, let's set a variable. We'll say, let's say primary, and we'll set that to red. And then I just want to say body, and we'll say background. This is just a test. We'll say background, and then we'll set it to the variable of primary. And let's save that. And that should actually get compiled automatically. Let's look at the main.css file. Okay, so it didn't, and I think that's because I closed Koala. Yeah, it's no longer open. Koala should be running in order for it to auto-compile, so I'll just resave this. There we go. Okay, so Koala went ahead and compiled it. Now if I look in my main.css file, it's just background red, because a CSS file can't have a variable inside of it. So now that's our workflow. We work in the Sass files, but it gets compiled to the CSS. Alright, I'm just going to get rid of this and save, and then that background will go away. Okay, so now we're going to work just like we have been, except we're going to use these SCSS files instead of the CSS. So in the next video, we'll go ahead and we'll get started building our project and creating our markup.